Good afternoon. My name is Mary Diericky, and with me at the front are Ester Regelson, Anya Engler, and Kathleen Moore, and we're representing the Friends of the Lower West Side. For this conversation today, we're going to give you a brief presentation about the Lower West Side and our efforts in attempting to save the few remaining buildings that are there. And after this PDF presentation, some members of the Friends of the Lower West Side are going to talk about the people who've been involved and what our actions have been, like getting councilperson support, that kind of thing. But we would like to see a good bit, most of the session devoted to the people in the room. We'd like to talk about everybody's efforts and in how to protect their local landmarks, particularly ones that have cultural as well as maybe architectural significance. So we're also looking forward to a good discussion and a long discussion. The Lower West Side is an area west of, we never really, it's west of about Broadway and south of Liberty Street. This used to be a really vibrant community. In the one map, you can see the docks, which of course are gone now. People worked on the docks, people worked in all the restaurants and places like that, there were so many of them because it was more of a commercial district than it is now. And they lived in tenements and converted row houses in this area. The area changed a lot from after World War II. A lot of it was wiped out for the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. And then more was wiped out for the World Trade Center. So major government actions kind of basically took away the neighborhood. And then when the docks went, that kind of took away people's livelihood. There was no reason for them to be there anymore. A lot of the people moved to Brooklyn and Staten Island. The Downtown Community House was set up in the 1920s, one of the last of these kind of community houses to be of a benefit to the people who were living in the tenements. The person who sponsored it was William Childs, who was of Bon-Ami Cleanser, and they had a building across the street, which is gone. They said it was for the perpetual welfare, although it lasted 11 years, of the men, women, and children who live and work in Lower Manhattan. It was built in 1925 to 26 and designed by John F. Jackson, who we'll talk about a little later, and it cost $300,000. It was a big deal. Al Smith laid the cornerstone. Jimmy Walker did the dedication. Al Smith said, this is it in 1929, with the tenement next door that we'd also like to see saved, 109 Washington Street. Al Smith said, there are few people in the city of New York today who realize the number of people who live in this section of the city. The Lower West Side to most people appears principally as a place of business, and to say that there are many tenements dwelling in the shade and shadow of the great tall buildings is very apparent. The community house had a health clinic, milk station, library, pool room, auditorium, classroom, schools, a typical community house. This is Washington Street. Some of these are left, but a lot of it is pretty different than it once was. Doesn't look like this now. Mayor Walker said apparently this was an issue at the time. He thanked Mr. Childs for help in turning back the Bolsheviki, helping God and man and making the stars and stripes brighter than ever before. The community houses and public baths, that's a whole other topic, and it was really interesting, and it wasn't all just to give people a place to take a bath and get help with their English languages. There was an Americanization component of this. And some fear, too, on the part of wealthy people. The building stopped being a community house in 1936, but it stayed in the community. It became a recreation and trading school. It housed government offices during World War II, and it was the Longshoremen's Union, so it even retained its connection to the docks. Then it was a Buddhist temple, and today it's vacant. The building next to it, which you can see on the right, you can just barely see it there. That's the St. George's Syrian Catholic Church, which is a landmark. The neighborhood was Irish and German. Later, Arabs moved in, mainly Syrians, but you know, things were. Anya can talk about this. Things were what was called Syria then is a bigger area. It was what we now, it would be Syria, Lebanon, and other countries. Greeks, Turks, Armenians, Slavs, Poles, Ukrainians. They all came at the typical time around 1900 when immigrants were coming. The neighborhood was known as Bowling Green Village, then became the Syrian colony with all those Syrian immigrants. The community house, according to the Times, served 16 nationalities, although it was probably more. The building next door, 109 Washington Street, is a tenement and one of the few in Lower Manhattan. I think there may be one other, but it's very rare down here, and that's Ester's building. The architecture, it's a nice building, and by an architect that has some distinction. Colonial revival style for community houses was popular at that time. First it was like the neoclassical, and then it became the colonial revival, which was considered a very American style. The architect did a lot of YMCA buildings all over the East Coast, and was known for those. He did a lot of. There's the Bergen Avenue Y in Jersey City. Some of them are on the National Register. He also designed public buildings that are also good-looking buildings. I want to say, I guess I can say it now, that the Landmarks Commission has repeatedly rejected this, our request for evaluation on this. Kathleen will get into this a little more, we'll talk about it later, as being better examples. There are better examples, and it wasn't architecturally distinguished enough. And this is what we'd like to talk about later, is when properties have only cultural significance or have both cultural significance and architectural significance. What happens? This is what we've lost since 2001. After 9/11, there was a big push for development in the area, and it got developed. There are some buildings that were designated for that time. One is the church that I pointed out. This is one of three buildings from 1799, little federal row houses, that Landmarks originally calendared and then decided only to designate one of the three. This is the Dickey House, which is also a early 19th century building. This building is, I'm sorry I don't have a photo. This building, if you've been down in that neck of the woods, is now being incorporated into a very tall, modern building. And if you look at it now, it's really shocking. This building is only 3 walls, and the rest is gone. This is considered preserving that building. 3 walls and a lot of steel structure. These are the buildings that have been lost. The one on the upper left is kind of a little mini-me to the building across the street, which is a very nice early 20th century terracotta building that is not being demolished because it's just tall enough. But this is gone. The one after that was a wonderful, the Western Electric Company building, one of the earliest of the telephone factories and probably the only remaining industrial building in Lower Manhattan. All of these buildings were good buildings, and all of them, and this is the problem, except for that, the center one, would not have had a chance at individual landmark designation. This is our campaign. It received support from our councilperson, from the Manhattan Borough President, and from some organizations. Hundreds of postcards. You saw some of our postcards on our table outside, and a Washington Street Historical Society had a petition. We're Friends of the Lower West Side. A couple of people really started an organization called the Washington Street Historical Society, which is basically to save the community house, to look into Washington Street, and also to do things that would celebrate the Arab community, and there were quite a few authors who were brought up and lived in this area, including the other one, Khalil Gibran, and the other one. We got a lot of local press, and oddly, a lot of international press because of the little Syria connection. Washington Street Historical Society produced a report, a history of the neighborhood and the various ethnic groups. Despite that, Landmarks has continued to reject the community house as being not good enough architecturally. What are we going to do? We have talked about expanding our request for evaluation to include the 5 contiguous 19th century structures. It's a stretch because the ones this is Washington Street, this is Greenwich Street. The ones on Greenwich are very altered. We will continue to get support from Community Board, which we have, and organizations and local electeds. Continue to talk to the press, which has been very sympathetic. And of course, there are other things in the world besides the Landmarks Commission. One is see if we can get a buyer. Of course, this isn't like raising $50,000. This is more like raising $5 million. But it's a possibility that, it's kind of a nice project. In addition, Esther's going to talk about this when we all go sit at the table. We're trying to celebrate the neighborhood in other ways, including an oral history project. So it's also about the intangible cultural heritage. But those are what we're doing, things we're doing, and what we're continuing to do. We're going to sit at the table, and we're going to chat a little bit more about these efforts, and then we'd love to open it up and have a discussion about what people have done in your neighborhood and what you think good steps are in the future to try and save neighborhoods or properties that have architectural and cultural heritage. So thank you very much for that, and now we're going to move on to the next phase. If I can. Thank you. Would you like to, questions are fine.
Who actually owns it? Is it the city who owns it?
No, a private developer owns this, and we think that a lot of, okay, there's several of these properties, including the community house, are now being used for air rights for a building that's going to be built on the corner but hasn't been built yet. So that's why we think that saving it and maybe even getting somebody to buy it is a little bit more of an option, because downtown, we're zoned like to heaven. I mean, I think we have basically no zoning. So air rights, they may have some from the community house. God knows how much they have left. It may be that not a very big building can be built there if they tear down the community house. It is, of course, in the meantime, not being taken care of and might just fall down on its own. But it is a private owner, and we're not really sure if it's the same private owner now or another.
They do own, own both, I live in the building that is right in the middle, so we have an empty lot next door to us. They tore down a parking deck there, but they also own the property on the other side, which is the community house. And my neighbors and I are very thankful right now that the father and son are suing each other. So there's a little bit of a delay, and we hope that we can somehow find a loophole of some kind to save this building before they rip it down. In their plan, originally, they were gonna build something enormous next to us where the garage used to be, and use that site to build something smaller, which doesn't make sense to me, because there already is something somewhat
Yeah.
smaller. But they, in order to have the air rights, they're supposed to have some kind of smaller space on that side. So, and they want our property too, but they haven't been able to get it, so we're thankful for that. Yes?
Yeah, my question is, if this building that here, the community house, is falling apart and will probably be structurally, has no structural integrity, would the city just allow it to fall? And if that's the case, then could the city designate this as unsafe?
Yeah, they could.
And so to give them the permission to just,
Yeah, I mean, that's generally what happens in this city these days, you know, demolition by neglect. That's the sort of the rule of thumb when owners don't want to keep what they've got and build something.
and if a new.
But they can demolish it right now.
Yeah, because it's not landmark.
And if a new person buys it, how much of the original structure would be left to
Well,
restore?
it's, right now, it's, as far as we know, it's structurally sound.
Oh,
It's
it
just
is.
that it's been gutted, so really, it's the structure itself that we want to save, because the facade is a lovely facade, and it's a charming, smaller building by comparison to what else is in the area. I'll just keep it standing.
Okay, so I'm going to,
The developers who knocked the garage down compromised the structure of my building in 2009. So they have no compunction about endangering whatever's there in order to do what they want. Yes.
Okay, I had gone to the records department when they did the Syria exhibit, which was great. It really was very interesting, very good, and I did a tour. The church is no longer a church, it's now a restaurant. But that building is okay. Now,
Yes,
is that
it's
building
landmark.
landmark?
That building is landmark.
Okay.
That's the Syrian church?
Yeah. Okay, so the other two buildings, and if I recall, you were talking about historical, one of the points that the guy who took us around said that it was a Syrian who went all the way to the Supreme Court to be able to become a U.S. citizen, because up until this Syrian did, only if you were white from Europe were you allowed to become a U.S. citizen. Can you use that as a way of?
We've been trying to push that, but the Landmarks Commission has indicated that the downtown community house wasn't working with the Syrian community by the time that it got built. The Syrian community had more or less moved out of the neighborhood. So we had a little bit of a disagreement there about the value of that property because through that.
Sometimes your story, I feel like I've heard it in many neighborhoods, that if there's any FAR play, the landmarks commission is not going to designate it either an historic district or an individual landmark, because they actively want it torn down and replaced. So in face of a regime like that, that's a policy regime
negotiate with the developer and compromise. That the developer can at least leave the building intact and build onto it. The Hearst Tower is one good example of that, where they have an old building where they built a small building on top of it. And I think that is probably the best thing to do, is to negotiate with the developer to at least save the building and leave it intact and build a new structure around it or on top of it or wherever, you know. And I've seen a church near the World Trade Center, whether it was a Catholic church, where the rectory was sold, and they actually built a tall building on top of the rectory.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's the next best thing to do, is to actually tell the developers that we're not trying to stop them from developing the property, but just leave the old buildings intact and build the old building on, you know, build a new structure as part of the old building.
That would, that works. There was a building that I showed you that was a corner building that was a very nice little terracotta building. We would have been happy for that to happen on that building, and we wouldn't have had a problem with that, figuring that we never would have gotten individual designation. But it was demolished in the blink of an eye, and it's been an empty lot for about 10 years. But yeah, we would do that.
And we've been talking to the community board about potentially having a meeting with the developers once they start formulating their own plan. But because there's some contention with the father and son who own it, we're kind of waiting to see what happens. So we're kind of in a holding pattern.
And you know what? We don't have any tools in the city. There's not a lot that the city can promise them to get them to save that front. I mean, even in Jersey City, they have something where they'll give them some kind of zoning change of areas, let them do things they otherwise wouldn't be able to do, if they will save some part of the building, save the facade, save a sign. We don't have that in New York City. So that'd be a nice thing to have, for example, something where they can get something from the city that's not just designating the property.
I think it would be good if the city would come up with something like that,
Yeah.
and they could see New Jersey an example, and they would follow that example. And I think that's another thing to talk to the city about, you know, tax credits, all that stuff, you know.
Well, that's an HDC thing, though. I mean, maybe HDC should be looking at that. Yeah. The person in the back,
Yeah, I just want to speak to something Lynn mentioned. We all really have to start taking on the Landmarks Preservation Commission. This is what their website says they're supposed to be doing. It's responsible for protecting New York City's architecturally, historically, and culturally significant buildings and sites by granting them landmark or historic district status. They have completely focused most of the time on architectural detail. But there are a few cases, depending upon public outcry, where they've had to switch gears. And one of them was the Stonewall Inn recently, in 2015, where there was such cultural and historical interest in that site that they moved away from the building itself is not something special at this point. And another example was one that Dan Allen mentioned at his opening presentation, the Hopper Gibbons House, which was a safe house for the underground slaves. That's culturally and historically significant. We're facing the same issue with the building down at South Street Seaport, the New Market site, which is a mid-century, simple industrial structure. Doesn't have the special detail that the tin building, which is landmarked, has. So there was a case, and I can't come up with it off my head, where somebody challenged the Landmarks Commission, not that you want to have to go to legal, but they challenged and won on the fact that they were not doing what they were supposed to be doing in terms of a building that had cultural and historic interest. And I'm afraid we're going to probably have to get together and get to that point of switching their mentality to not only deal with special architectural detail.
I think that 827 Broadway is a good example of the GVSHP got that through based on a heavy cultural significance, the mid-century modernist architecture, art, and it's a beautiful building, but that had already been turned down by Landmarks, and it only got designated by that extra cultural significance. So at least that's one example we have where it happened, but it doesn't happen often. But white sweater.
Since the lady talked about the Times and the Wall Street Journal, as a professor professor. I use Khalil Gibran's books about just fabulous. But he wrote a long paper at Columbia University before he died, an impassioned paper before all the stuff that's going on in Syria happened now about how Syrian and Arabic identity is being destroyed.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if not just the Syrians, but the Arabic community here, including his daughter, who lives in Dumbo, by the way, I'm wondering if you couldn't approach key people in the Arabic and Syrian community, per se, to really make a big deal.
We,
And then
That
would get
that has
the
happened.
press and everyone else involved.
we continue to do that, and there's a very large quantity of press in the Arab worlds about us, and videos and films and all sorts of things. We're continually covered by the press, including the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. The Syrian community is where it started, this effort to preserve, because the people who grew up there are still around. We still have not gotten anyone who wants to be a William Childs and buy this building. But I personally live in one of the buildings, not one of these that are going to be landmarked. I live in Mary Dierick's building, and it's a 12-story building. And when I moved in, I thought, oh, this is an empty neighborhood. Well, little did I know. And I found out about this community by walking down the street, down Washington Street, which is totally empty most of the time. And there were a cluster of people standing in front, across the street from the community house, and being led on a tour by Joe Spivak, our president. And again, talking about the roots of this community. It coincided with the publication of one of these little chapbooks. We have one downstairs of the local neighborhood getting together, throwing in all of their, I grew up, this is where my prom took place, and this is a picture of me and my family at Thanksgiving, and so on. And so it's definitely a rooted community that we're talking about. It's just that the community is gone. And we continue to find these people. In the last 10, 15 years, the response has snowballed, and we're now getting recognition like today. So it continues to grow.
There.
Two questions. One of them is, what do you think is the significance of the building, historical, aesthetic, cultural, or architectural significance of the building, that it would stand the test of time, that it would be recognized as landmark over many others? And my second question is, the Tenement Museum, which was, for 50 years, it was vacant. How did they become a museum? And it's an extraordinary experience if
Yeah,
you have not been there. So how did that happen? What was that process like?
Well, with the Tenement Museum, as I understand it, they came across a tenement that was that hadn't been renovated. I think it was empty, and they bought it. And then the person who started the Tenement Museum, whose name I can't, was really one person that was just, it was an incredible accomplishment. I can't. No. Anyway, one person really started that, and then with a lot of help from her friends, and then it just grew and grew. It's an amazing accomplishment. I think in the case of the community house, we don't have that intact interior. It wouldn't really make a museum. Its significance is that it's part of the last kind of vestige of thriving and vibrant neighborhood. It's one of the later community houses. No sense, why not? I mean, I don't see why one of the later ones can't be represented too. It's a decent architect who's distinguished as, it's not McKim White, but he did a lot of good buildings. It's intact, and it's a good example of a later community house. So in addition, with its cultural significance and the fact that it's one of the only things left downtown like that, this is why I think it is significant and why it should be a landmark.
Just to we have tried different tactics, and one of the things that our founder, Joe, has brought up, Joe Salak, is that the three buildings together, we have the church, which was a religious site, we have the community house, which was a social service site, and we have the tenement that I live in, that's been continuously lived in since it was built in 1886. So we have these three significant structures that it's a snapshot of the history of what this neighborhood once was. So we tried to do all three as a group and say, look, and we're trying to take a different tack now where there's a couple of buildings on the other side of us that if we're contiguous, maybe we could do a little, what do you call it, a little neighborhood preservation. But the Landmarks isn't going to listen to us. I mean, we're pretty clear on that. We've gone to our electeds. They support us. We have resolutions from the community board. They support us. So, you know, we're trying everything we can.
Charlie?
The nature of this building, you say it's an intact building and structurally sound, and it has, is this a high ceiling building?
Yeah,
So-
not super.
So could it be adaptively incorporated into a new structure built around and above it?
Well, there's not really room, you know. I think somebody could build on top of it. It would probably be difficult. We're not sure how many air rights they have left. So what the developer was talking about was building a glassy building that would be better for retail. So, you know.
That you couldn't use this building if you retain the facade, and because there's two aspects to a building. One is what you see, and the other is what you use it for.
Mm-hmm.
But if they were able to, and you see this happening, especially in Washington all the time, is that they'll keep the facade and build a new building behind it. So
And
that you get.
that makes so much sense that it's almost too sensible for,
Well, but see, the thing is, it has to be economically advantageous, or
Yeah.
at least attractive in some manner to the owner.
we have to make a deal with them is what,
Right.
and
It's
is
expensive.
what you brought up.
It's expensive to do this. I mean, they have to do a lot of, you know, really ingenious shoring and so forth. But yet, if it can be done, where they at least have some, you know, reason other than a feel-good reason. I mean, to ask somebody to spend an extra $1 million just to make the people around feel nice, that's a big pull. But that would seem like the only way to make it happen.
That might be the only way.
I had worked down at 100 Broadway, and I can see the scaffolding of, was it 74, 76 Liberty, Trinity?
Yeah,
And I was
the
just
Dickey
shocked.
House.
I thought, why
Yes.
isn't anyone preserving this beautifully intact building? And it seemed like, and maybe this is one of the issues, there's like lack of a strong residential community, where, for example, in Greenwich Village, there's more people. I'm wondering if that's, aside from the LPC just being so difficult and acting arbitrarily, do you feel that you don't have a strong enough residential outcry?
Yeah, we don't. It's we have more people living downtown than in that area than have for like a century or so. But it tends to be a bit of a transient community. So yeah, we don't. It is certainly not like a Greenwich Village community with it's not as deep in the people. There aren't that many people who are making a big deal of this.
So I think it's a matter of, you're not the only ones in
Yeah.
other areas, and it's a matter of changing the strategy because you don't have
Yeah.
that residential strength perhaps.
Well-
And how do you do that? How do you get the support?
Well, we had a block party last year, and that a surprising amount of people came who lived in the area. So there are things we can do.
And we also are in touch with people who lived there before. Now, in my building, one of my neighbors has lived there since before both acts of eminent domain. In fact, when he was a child, they used to sneak up into the Trade Center building as it was being built. So, you know, he's the last person to have witnessed 2 acts of eminent domain, the neighborhood gutted, and he's still there. You know, and that's it. But we're trying to keep in touch with the people who lived there before And that's one of the other things we're doing is we're doing oral histories to talk about what that history was like, what it was like to live in the neighborhood when there were so many ethnic communities living there. There were 27 different ethnicities at one census in the 20s at one time. You know, and it's all gone. So we're doing our best to at least preserve that.
In the back.
Could you just clarify what is in the building now? In other words, and also ideally, what would you all like to see in the building? So the building
It's
forever
vacant
is
and
landmark, then what?
it's vacant and we don't have access to it, so it would be interesting to see what it's like inside. We'd just like it to be saved. We don't really care what goes there. I mean, ideally, it would be great if some organization bought it, and you know, it's very close to the World Trade Center site. It would be great if somebody bought it, you know, that you know, World Peace Organization or something, I don't know. But really, I think we just want it saved.
I think one of the things that many of us in our group think of it as, and I just thought of this as we were talking today, it's like a park. Our neighborhood is, once again, it's not eminent domain, it was 9/11, and the neighborhood has just gone like that. There are like 5 hotels that I can see outside my window in a very small space between Liberty and like Albany, Rector Street. Every corner, there's construction going on. There are cranes. They want to get to be 80-story buildings. The 30-story buildings were small peanuts now. They're going to tear those down and put bigger ones. And so we see this as a landmark of what our city was. And perhaps somebody, including us, should be thinking about starting a movement to have these markers in areas of the city that are being just totally changed.
I just wanted to add to my point is I think that, you know, the poetics of this is profound and the need to keep this building I certainly appreciate, but I would think that if there are any further negotiations going forward, with landmarks or most likely with the developer, or even some miraculous person who comes and saves this building, it seems like it behooves you to be quite definite as to what you would want to see or how it could operate and how that would advantage the community rather than we just want to save it.
Okay.
I think it would be a more convincing argument.
Well, haven't we also thought as a streetscape, instead of just having these skyscrapers, to have some historical interest, especially since it's so close to the memorial and all that. I mean, for tourism.
Yeah, it's a good strategy and something that we have not done, which is to put forward an alternate scenario other than just don't tear this down. Yeah.
Have you tried to maybe unite with another organization in that area, another neighborhood or association that could work with you in proposing this and getting them to be able to help you to push this?
Well, there aren't that many. The only, it's downtown's a little bit different, you know, in that regard. But for example, it's a Battery Park City. Those people are like really good organizers. It's possible that they might like this saved, but most people tend to Seaport. They're not going to leave the Seaport area, and Battery Park City isn't going to leave the Battery Park City area, but worth a try.
When we had our other group, the
Citizens for-
Washington Street Historical Society, who are focusing mainly on the Arabic community that settled there, but they have a longer arm in that community where they're gathering people from that community to try to galvanize some kind of historical preservation and perspective on it. They put plaques up there helping to design a new park that's going to be where the battery tunnel comes out. There's a awful little trashy park it's going to be built up. And we've also had signs that are going up to commemorate the neighborhood at Liberty Park, which faces the Trade Center on one side and Washington Street on the other. So.
I haven't heard you mention the National Register. Have you looked into determination of eligibility?
You know,
Not
we-
a listing, because I assume the owner would be opposed.
Yeah.
But this was really critical, looking at Gregory right here, in
Yes.
saving the Austin Nichols and Company warehouse. Landmarks actually did the right thing, but the city council council member defeated the landmarking, but we got it determined eligible for the National Register, and later on, when a new partner came in for the development, he went, oh my God, we can get tax credits. And that's what saved the building.
We've been a little afraid. After 9/11, a group tried to get the whole area a designated historic district, and I was completely shot down by the register because they felt there wasn't enough left, and we were going to do that, but I would maybe like to do it informally first, because what we don't want, it would be really bad if we couldn't get it. So, because there's probably nothing left inside. We can't have access to inside. But yeah, we've been thinking about it, and I'm sure it would help if we could get it. But
The law is really weak in landmarks, HDC is the national.
yeah,
register
yeah,
designation. But I think getting, assuming you can,
Yeah.
getting a determination of eligibility, like for the 3 buildings that you talked about.
Yeah.
It seems like there's really little to lose.
oh yeah,
The law is pretty weak.
Mm.
You know, what would help is if a new developer comes in and sees that advantage.
yeah.
And it helps with PR.
Yes, it does. People who have not spoken in the green.
Yeah, I would think that if we could get communities involved, and we can actually do a video. I saw a documentary on television a couple of years ago about a family who had a house, it was a large mansion, and they made a video of their whole life history and how they grew up in the house and everything, and their friends and everybody had something to say about it. They told the whole story about the history of this house and how the family grew up in it. And it impressed me because I think similar stories can be used about these neighborhoods. Families can get together and talk about them. Kids, I think if we especially get kids together and have the kids come out and advocate saying, they're taking all this away from the younger generation. Our kids aren't going to be able to see it. If we actually get kids to talk about this, I think maybe developers will start seeing, the impact they're having on the communities.
Oh, that'd be great.
To do videos and actually put them on, like YouTube or television and stuff like that. But I think, and if we get some celebrities, some famous celebrities to advocate, maybe people who grew up in the neighborhood, who had some connections, like rock star with the in New Jersey.
Bruce Springsteen.
Bruce, yeah, he was an advocate for a lot of the stuff in Asbury Park.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of money was saved because he advocated things to be saved in Asbury Park. And I think that would be a good thing, and to find a way to network,
There have been films on the area, and particularly in Arab TV, on the history of the area, but that's not quite the same as what you're talking about.
There is a
I think
film,
if people told about
Yeah,
their
yeah.
emotions and their history and stuff like that, we could show it to the developers, and it may change their mind to see, how would you feel about your neighborhood if this was to happen to you, that kind of thing.
oh,
I know.
that's what, I was just going to say that the Arab American National Museum had this exhibition about Little Syria, which was at Ellis Island in October, and then at the Metropolitan College on Washington Street in January, right?
And also at
At the archive.
At
At
the
the archives.
municipal archives.
But part of that exhibition was a video with the people who lived there before, which was really very interesting and moving.
I think a number of us woke up a few years ago now. I'm trying to remember where the big controversy was. I remember New York wanted, Chinatown, and everyone else. I said, well, the people in Chambers Street in your neighborhood don't want a mosque. And,
right.
and they tried to kill that mosque.
Mm.
The whole
Oh, the
idea
old
was a
Burton-
But it
landmark
wasn't
issue.
the residents.
I know, but still, it's a huge bunch of people.
Oh, yeah.
that got
We were in the
behind
middle of
keeping
it.
that mosque. The developer, the landmarks people were to get something built over the mosque, as I remember. A lot of us were involved with demonstrations and things down there. And I can't remember what the address was, but you know about it.
It's
That was
just,
What about some of those people that were so involved?
Right-wing Christian hedge funders?
that,
I think that the other people.
Now, it was the Arabic community. that was-
yeah, it's a little different. I mean, the Arabic community, well, first of all, the Washington Street Historical Society is trying to galvanize that community to some extent. The Arabic community that settled downtown were mostly Christian. There's hardly even a record of the Muslim community there. So it's a sort of a different
I see.
group of people, but we are trying to work with them as well.
Yes.
I'm hearing everything everyone is saying, and the thing is that, and at the same time, you are in a very unique position in that, like, you're dealing with the ethnic minority community in New York City that's also in the midst of also being constantly in the national headline because of the war. And I am aware that you're very well known in the Arabic community, and actually and every time I've been in the Middle East, people were familiar with your project. Yeah, I actually met people in Baghdad, in Qatar, and
Wow.
Yemen, and other places in the Middle East that were familiar with your work, actually. And I saw you guys on Al Jazeera twice, too. Like,
That would be the work of Todd Fine from the
Yeah.
Washington Street Historical Society.
But however, as someone who's part of the Chinese community, who's done work with Lower East Side Chinatown, Flushing Chinatown, and Sunset Park, thing is that I can't help but notice similarities in the sense that you have a very unique situation where you're trying to get a ethnic community that's newly emerged into a neighborhood that needs to learn, that is trying to understand that they are part of it. They're part of the makeup and the fabric and the history of the community that they have inherited, that they're not an outsider, but they're now part of the story. And I think in the sense that, like, one of the issues is that you have to find the bridge of
That's a good
connection,
idea.
of inclusiveness,
Yeah.
and that they're part of it because, and within Elmhurst, it's particularly that it's now predominantly Asian, Chinese in particular, but the roots of it is Irish and Italian. And I've had many issues when trying to connect with my Chinese community to get them to understand that I know you're not Irish Catholic, but things that this Irish Catholic church is part of the history of this neighborhood, that things that gave the foundation of our former apple groves. So I actually have met members of your community too, and things that I wonder if sometimes if they feel more comfortable communicating with people who are in preservation, who are in a similar situation than with people that their concern may not be fully understand their concerns, especially with so many who are, let's be honest here, refugees of war.
Yeah, well, reaching out to our community now is certainly something that we need to do more of. It's
Do you feel that it would be beneficial for them for the members of like the Chinese or the Cambodian or other ethnic communities that have built up their, like, for example, the Asian American community has their own preservation community. And Syrians and other members of the Middle East are considered part of the Oriental heritage. Like, get them to understand that, like, because we share a history of being refugees of war and genocide and annihilation. So why not get them to understand that you are now part of the story of America?
Well, that is being worked on, you know, I mean, the reason you know about that is.
That I know.
Yeah.
Because they gave contacted me, asking me to come over to your neighborhood.
yeah. Well, another problem is that the community doesn't live in the community anymore. So we are trying to preserve where they used to live,
Oh, we have to stop.
which makes another layer of
Because
complication.
they see that's where they needed to be to survive. Now that they're able to get out, thing is that to them it's a painful past that they don't want to remember.
Actually, they have very fond memories of the
yeah,
neighborhood.
they love to.
In fact, I just
Come back.
interviewed Charlie Sahadi, because people don't know that Sahadi's used to be around the corner, you know, right on Washington Street, and then they moved to Atlantic Avenue.
People that have fond memories.
Okay, we have like two more. I think
And
then we have to.
You haven't spoken.
I think she brings up a good point
And
in
then-
that in numbers there's strength. And in some ways you're unique, but in some ways
are other people, organizations, sites experiencing something similar. And to reinvent the wheel to try to get the attention is difficult, but working together may be a better way. And it's not just us in here, it's in all the boroughs, many neighborhoods, many sites, all experiencing a somewhat similar
Yes.
situation.
Yes.
May I add just a note, a positive note, or hope, note, bit of hope? After all the brouhaha about Confederate statues and everything, there was a new Monuments Commission, and you must have read about what they did, the 4 monuments that some they've taken away and some they put elsewhere. But I read their statement, and their aim is to bring to prominence underserved ethnic ethnic people who might want a monument. So maybe there is a move towards towards giving a bit of prominence to the small ethnic minorities that make up New York, and that might serve for neighborhoods.
Okay. We have 2 more questions, you and Lynn.
Very quickly, touching on these different points, what about the UN or UNESCO from the Syrian angle? Have you approached those institutions?
No, wouldn't even know. I mean, I'm involved with US ECOMOS, so there's a path there, but certainly would take a bit to actually even figure out how to do it. But they're having some big to-do regarding, you know how the UN is, it's like a Section 5013 conference, and then this is about the environment, but one little part of it is preservation. And that's like really soon, so, but maybe too late, but that would have been a good, maybe there's still time, that would be a good avenue. Yeah, okay. Lynn.
I just want to say that I've been watching you guys for a few years now. I've seen Todd find in action. You guys are heroic. You have done a spectacular job, and every other organized preservation movement can really actually learn from you rather than the other way around. Really, the work you've done is amazing, and it's really deeply frustrating that you keep getting this no. So, and I think maybe Todd has worked on the Arab connection, the international angle. He's got all the press you're going to get. That narrative has failed.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking maybe there's another narrative you need to go for. So, your neighborhood was targeted by the Rockefellers and big real estate and Moses for we want to excise the working class waterfront from our city and financialize it. And this is what's left. We'll try back as like another part. And that's what's all that's left. So
We have been trying to,
Yeah.
Second, this is another point.
Yeah,
is that maybe also you could use turn the eminent domain rhetoric against them. So whoever owns this property is warehousing it or screwing around in some speculative way. So you say, eminent domain destroyed this neighborhood. We want eminent domain of this property to turn it into 100% affordable housing. And that's it. And so maybe you try to switch it so that it gets a little more aggressive again.
Yeah, that's great.
we have been talking about turning around pointing out the eminent domain and how
They could use eminent domain. All this administration cares about is affordable housing anyway.
Yeah.
So say we want eminent domain for affordable housing. This is a speculative slumlord. He's like not doing the thing. He's a bad apple. Take it. There's properties in East Harlem that have the same profile. They're just being warehoused. It's a huge amount of housing that's been sitting around for 20 years. Why not? The guy gets some money out of it.
Thank you very much.